Hello there, this is Denzian, and today I'm looking at this Blood Bowl, the game of fantasy football by Jervis Johnson, when they used to stick his name on the box, which is nice of them. This is the second edition, although it doesn't say that on the actual box, of this very well known GW game from back in the 80s. This is the first edition of Blood Bowl that I ever played, though. I remember picking up the first edition later as a bit of a novelty, really. But this is the original game that got me into it. Probably the first game of this scale that they released that I actually played. I was 11 years of age. Got the rules wrong, of course, as I still do. But I had great fun with it. Always have. I've always loved Blood Bowl, which is funny because I absolutely hate sports. But there we go. But I guess it's because in most sports you don't get to run around and beat each other up. But there you go. Um, what I've always liked about this version of Blood Bowl is the poppiness of it. It's always been a bit more comical, hasn't it, Blood Bowl, than any other Warhammer-esque version, any game. But this, to me, was always the most fun. I think it got very convoluted, because you always had White Dwarf articles, didn't you, with added more and more to the game, and it got a bit all over the place. And even with the supplement books, such as the Star Players book that they did and so on, or Dungeon Bowl, or, well, Elves, Dwarves and Dungeon Bowl, as it was originally called, which I also had back in the day. It got a bit out of control, I feel. There's just stuff all over the place. But then it disappeared, didn't it, until the 90s, when it came out in the mid-90s. I think the mid-90s version, which I also had, was probably the best version for rules. I think, even though the rules didn't really change, it didn't seem to get too confusing. You had all the teams, you had star players for all the teams, and they did the Death Zone with some special play cards and campaign rules. And that was kind of it. It didn't really overstay its welcome, if you know what I mean. I think today's versions of Blood Bowl, there seems to be constantly adding new teams for the sake of it. Finding like gnomes. It's like, where they come from? But it's fun. But I just feel like it's hard to keep track. But I think the 90s version you could keep track of what was going on. But this version was the one that got me into it. Let's just have a little look at the box. If I flip it over, there we go. Nice and colourful. Nice selection of players there from the different races. A little view of what's inside the box. 64 pages of rules, backgrounds, many in full colour. 32 finely sculpted Blood Bowl players, which all look the same, but never mind. Amazing stone textured Astro Granite playing surface, or polystyrene to me and you. A great bit of artwork there. Players 2, of course, 14 to adult. Oh, no wonder I was getting the rules wrong. I was only 11. Oh, my word. 1 to 2 hours. I think it took us about 8 hours. I think we stopped the game halfway through and then continued it the following weekend, me and my friend. I think the main rule we got wrong originally was moving one player each per turn, like a chessboard. Oh dear, silly. Famous players left to right, tells you who they are. That's nice. I do find that the more modern version of this game, and the 90s version actually, the boxes weren't as tall as this, so you couldn't really fit much in it. If you wanted to store your minis in the box that you got later, like other teams, you couldn't fit them in the box. Although this box is taken up mainly by the pitch. If I take the lid off, what we've got inside. Now this is, I've lost the original rules, so I've got a photocopy of the rules. And I don't have the handbook. There was a sort of handbook with the lore of the game, the background, which is the same in every version, though. It hasn't changed. So I don't really miss it, to be honest with you, because I've got it in other versions as well. But again, nice poppy, bright, comical view of the teams, and the same teams that are still with us today, which is great. And the rules haven't really changed, have they? I think in the latest edition, they've added an extra stat for, I can't think, whatever reason. Orc cheerleader, just what you don't want to see. But really, the game hasn't really changed too much, has it? It is what it is, and that's the great thing about it. It's always been easy to get into, no matter what edition you come across, because it's not really changed. But I think the latest edition has added a couple of little extra bits and bobs. I did get the rule book. I didn't get the main box game because I didn't feel the need, to be honest with you. But black and white, of course, apart from the colour on the sides. But as you can see, I've had to photocopy the original because I've lost it. Other things that haven't changed over the years: the old range ruler, quick pass, short pass, long bomb. We also have the throw-in template. Not over-designed like the big plastic MacGuffins you get these days, but clear plastic, acetate I suppose, so you can see straight through, look at where you're going. These were very handy, the actual rules on one little card of each player, which position they're in, all their stats, so you can just get into the game straight away. Of course, this is the human team, and you have an orc team in here as well, so there's the orcs. And back in the day when you used to colour coordinate the bases of the minis, so you could see what position they held, and that was because all the minis in the original game here were the same. All the plastic orcs were the same, all the plastic humans were the same, but they had different coloured plastic rims on the bases, so you could see what player they were, what position they held, which was nice. The dugouts, not as detailed as they are these days, with all your coffins in them and bits of dead person. Still a bit of that, a few bones here and there. So you could keep track of where your players were in the reserve box or completely out for the count. And your score track was on this as well. I think in the more recent versions it's on the actual board, but here they're on the dugouts. Yeah, I think the more recent games these look better, don't they? The minis themselves, there's the players' numbers you can stick on the figures. Just move these to one side for a moment. I've been using baggies here from Gladiator Miniatures. Anyway, these are my orcs. There they go. I've actually split them up, so I've got two sets of orcs. Now, two different teams. So I've got the Auckland Raiders in yellow and the Gouge Die in red. And both the same mini, different team colours. Grey base for linesmen. So what I've been doing slowly is collecting metal minis from the 80s to fill in the actual positions of throwers and so on, which I'll show you in a moment. And I've been going for the Gouge Die on that, so I thought keep the linesmen as the minis from the original game, and I've got I think 6 or 7 or so for those, all painted the same for linesmen. And then the metal miniatures, which are down there, I'll show you in a moment, were to fill in the other positions. So you don't need them all to look the same. In the 80s I used to wish I had the metal minis, but being a child I never got them. And I've done exactly the same for the humans as well. So what teams do we have? If I remember correctly, very similar colour schemes for both. I think one's the Bright Crusaders and one the Reichland Reavers. Which one's which? Bright Crusaders, Reichland Reavers. Yeah, I think that's right. Blue and white stripes on the Bright Crusaders. I just used contrast paint, which didn't really work very well on these minis, I have to say. Bit basic that they are. Anyway, there's the same again for those. Let's put them to one side. We also have the scatter template for when you drop the ball. 1 to 8, where does it go? Get the dice out there. And then we have the pit. The pitch itself. Now the pitch is usually card these days, isn't it, with grass? But the old polystyrene board still got the Blood Bowl insignia in the middle there. They never did this again, did they? The polystyrene pitch, the Astro Granite pitch. Maybe it was an expense thing, I don't know. If you try and find this today on eBay or something like that, most people over the years have painted their pictures so the squares stand out more. The slabs of stone which you move your men around is the steps where the dugout is. And I like that. I like the fact it was 3-dimensional. It wasn't just a cardboard drawing. And then we have the end zones with your little teams. So if you're the Lowdown Rats and you're Goblins and Skaven, then that one's there. Or Chaos All-Stars, probably the team you don't want to meet. You could pop that in the end there as well. So yeah, very colourful, very poppy. Who else have we got? The Elfheim Eagles, Darkside Cowboys. So both elf good and bad. Champions of Death for your Scallybobs. Dwarf Giants for your dwarfs, of course. And then we have the Orc teams, Auckland Raiders and the Gouged Eye. And yes, Bright Crusaders with the blue and white stripes there. They've been kind of redone recently, haven't they, as sort of Bretonians, which kind of makes sense when you look at that, doesn't it? And then you've got the Reichland Reavers, which of course are very Empire in today's fluff, but both just human teams in the original. So you could pop those on the end, which is nice. Yeah, I do miss this Astro Granite sort of board. But yeah, very hard to find it without it being painted in by some child. Luckily mine stayed as it was. What else do we have on the box? Let's have a look at the other games available at the time. Still in those early days of these large box games, so you have all their other smaller games. Some of them I've unboxed already. Some of them I don't have, never had. Some of the minis available, the metal minis. Oh, there's the elf cheerleader, who's much nicer looking than the orc one. Other games, roleplay, the Warhammers, of course, and expansions for Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer Battles. And then more minis around this side with your referees. No Skaven there, they haven't done the Skaven yet by the looks of it. But these are the minis I've been trying to pick up for the human and orc teams, and I've been quite successful with some of them. Let's see if I can make them visible for people. So for example, I've rimmed them the right colours so we know what position they're in. So red for the Blitzers, if I remember correctly. So there's my Bright Crusader Blitzers in metal from the 80s. That's these fellas. I've got catchers and throwers. So I think throwers are the white. And they usually have a pointy hand, so you know they're a thrower. It's always good to have a pointy hand to know who's who. Blockers. Do we still have blockers? Blockers seem to have disappeared and then came back, I think. So blockers in green. They're the heavy dudes. And then we have our catchers, who obviously need a big glove or one hand out, ready to catch that long bomb heading your way. One with and without helmet. There he is. Same for the orcs. I don't think I've got all the orcs. I'm missing a couple. I need another catcher and another thrower. But other than that, I'm pretty much there. So a blocker there. Yes, another catcher, hand up, ready to catch. So again, thrower, giving a good old point. I'm going to throw it over there, just so you know. Another blocker. This is before we had black orc blockers, so it's just orc blockers. And then my two metal blitzers. There we go. That's a typical blitzer pose there. Ready to shoulder barge you out of the way. Yeah, so I'm missing two orcs in metal, so I still need to crack on with that. But there they are. So that's Blood Bowl, the second edition. I wouldn't say the best edition. As I say, I think the 90s, the third edition, was probably the better played version for me. But nostalgia reasons, this was my first love. I used to slice out all the articles from White Dwarf, even though I never got any of the metal minis back in the day. But used to love the game. I think it's because I could play it once I got the rules right in my head. And everyone knew what they were doing. Score a touchdown, win the game. Everyone can get involved in that. And you get to beat your opponents up at the same time. So there we go. Blood Bowl, the game of fantasy football. Classic game, classic edition. And did you have this edition? Do you like this edition? What is the best edition? Is the new edition any good? I've got no idea. I have got the newer version of Dungeon Bowl. Never played it, but I've got it. But I don't know, again, if the newer version beats any of the previous versions. So if you have an opinion, let me know. Maybe I'll get it, maybe I won't. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you again. Cheers.